From 1974 to 1982, the British folk rock duo Richard and Linda Thompson released a string of 6 immaculately crafted, timeless, breathtakingly profound albums that awed and blew away the few people who bought them back then, and have only grown in stature since, inspiring and influencing scores of notable bands and artists, many of whom you, the listener, are very familiar with. From 1974's I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight, undisputedly deserving to be on anyone's list of 10 greatest folk rock albums ever, alongside Bob Dylan and the Byrds, to the anguish, pain, catharsis, and songwriting virtuosity of the duo's breakup album, 1982's Shoot Out the Lights. Richard and Linda did the seemingly impossible. They took roots music playing with traditional rock and folk instruments and created a unique and original sound that raised the bar for songwriting prowess and explored the depths of the human condition rarely heard in the pop music idiom. And that's saying something coming from a post-Dylan musical landscape. Welcome to Richard and Linda Thompson, A Legacy.
Hey, it's the Curmudgeons, and welcome to the 27th edition of the Curmudgeon Rock Report. This is Christopher O'Connor coming to you from suburban Houston, and with me, as always, is Arturo Andrade coming to you from Gwangju, South Korea. And we host a podcast made just for you. We do not do hot takes, we do honest takes. So then this belongs to you. Who are you? You are the rock geek iconoclastic outsider looking for safe haven in a world where rock no longer predominates. Well, it sure as heck does here on the Curmudgeon Rock Report, where we not only celebrate the music, we live its majesty in full color and at full force. And hey, there's a good chance you'll learn some stuff here that you never knew before. And now you can join our new invite-only Facebook group, which we call the Curmudgeon Rock Report's Curmudgeonly Community. Join us there and share thoughts, musings, and random excitement with fellow travelers along the curmudgeonly path to rock and roll goodness. Arturo, hello there, sir.
I'm doing well. I'm glad you're doing well. I'm especially doing well because this is the time of year that I really like when it comes to following music, because new releases haven't quite come out and accumulated yet to the point where you feel the pressure that you have to start listening to everything. So you can sit back, reflect on things you have heard before. And it's perfect because this entire episode is one gigantic reflection.
Yeah, absolutely. It reflects. It might blind you if you look in the light too long. But yeah, no, you're right. I mean, it's a good time to catch up at the beginning of the year too. And that's another thing about this format and what we're talking about today. It's a good time to catch up on a particular artist that other people might not consider or might not be top of mind for them to catch up on. Well, hey, that's why we're here. We're doing you a public service. And so we'll be talking about a legacy. Whose legacy? We'll get into that very, very soon. Now, wait. Do I hear spaceships in the horizon? Do I feel the cosmic rain? Why, yes, I do, because we are now in the parallel universe, folks. The parallel universe is our weekly segment in which we introduce you to some new music, specifically new albums that Arturo and I have been checking out and listening to lately, and ones that we wish that you and the world would embrace the same way that the whole bunch of us used to embrace U2 35 years ago. Not really happening these days, but hey, dare to dream. And when we're in this universe, it does happen. So that said, Arturo, who are you talking about this week in the parallel universe?
Oh yeah, one of my favorite albums of last year. I can honestly say it came out last year, and it's by an R&B soul singer from Atlanta by the name of Curtis Harding, and his most recent album, If Words Were Flowers. Now, Curtis Harding is an R&B soul artist who was born in Michigan, actually, but he grew up in Atlanta as a part of a small Mennonite Christian community. Eventually, he grew out of it, of course.
Mm.
In fact, if any of you out there are familiar with the terrific Atlanta-based garage rock band Black Lips,
Oh,
uh,
great band.
yeah, Harding formed an R&B garage rock fusion band called Night Sun with members of Black Lips way back in 2009. His solo debut, Harding's debut, Soul Power, came out in 2014, and it was an excellent hybrid of well written rock and soul that was retro without necessarily being revivalist or nostalgic for the past, which is really kind of a tough trick to pull off.
Yeah.
His follow up album, 2017's Face Your Fear, was a very well produced but ultimately underwhelming effort. It was a little monotonous in its ballad heaviness, which is usually a sign of just not having the killer tunes. And I know why, because if you read the credits, Curtis Harding wrote all the songs on his debut album. On his second album, he co-wrote them all with the producer. So that's kind of a sign right there that maybe he didn't quite have all the goods for the second album. But oh boy, do the killer tunes show up on his new album, which came in at number 11 in my list of top albums of 2021. This is a straight up late 60s, early 70s soul power album, ready made for Soul Train if that TV show still existed. Uh, it's the kind of music that the Black Keys and Danger Mouse would have loved to co-opt for their next hypothetical album together. It's that good. Imagine Isaac Hayes with a little Marvin Gaye thrown in, plus add like all the yearning and introspective of contemporary soul stars such as Michael Kiwanuka. It's got all that to it. There are two things that keep this album, in my opinion, from being just another run-of-the-mill retro revivalist soul record. First, while the songs are indeed more varied, both melodically and in their tempos from his disappointing second album, the overall songwriting is just much more improved. It's classicist in approach. The melodies and hooks just sink in and don't let up, I should say. And so what if they're all love songs? When they're delivered with this much skill and effortlessness, I mean, to ask for anything more is just greedy, you know.
Yeah.
The second reason this album stands out from other modern soul records, and perhaps the main reason, is the arrangements, particularly the horn arrangements. The horn section, they are the stars of this album, providing exquisite textures and punctuation to Harding's smooth as silk vocals. The slightly psychedelic guitars, played by him, by the way, that weave in and out of the mix are a genuine treat as well. If you want standout tracks, just refer to the two singles from the album. You have the gospel tinged, desperately optimistic symphonic sweep of Hopeful, and you have the gorgeous, moving, pleading I Won't Let You Down, a track that could very well serve as a healthier alternative to Viagra. In a parallel universe, Curtis Harding would be one of the country's biggest R&B soul stars. Everyone should check out If Words Were Flowers, one of the two or three best soul albums of 2021.
Yeah, I have to spend more time with this record, but as a general comment, I will say that right now seems like it's a fertile time for revivalist soul, at least in Britain. It seems like most of the good stuff that I've heard of that sort of ilk, of that sort of 70s quoting soul, is coming from Britain. And then here in the States, I don't know if you've heard it. It's a fun record, even though it's kind of corny. I don't know if you've heard the Silk Sonic record yet.
No, is that the one that what's his face?
That's Bruno Mars and Anderson
Yes,
.Paak.
Bruno Mars. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, it's a fun record, but it's really kind of corny to the point that you roll your eyes. And so anything that's reverent but original in this sort of, like you said, the soul revival, the true soul idiom, I will definitely want to check out and spend more time with. So sounds good.
All right, Chris, what do you have?
Okay, so I'm going in a completely, utterly different direction than Arturo with my pick. So I will be talking a little bit about the album Jubilee by the band Japanese Breakfast. They've been getting a little bit of coverage in the mainstream because of this beguiling, smile-inducing, retro-rific record. So let me just explain this a little bit. Now, band leader Michelle Zauner has just about the most indie-rific modern-day rock biography imaginable. Korean immigrant, raised in Eugene, Oregon, attended college at Bryn Mawr near Philadelphia, author of a new memoirs about her uniquely American journey about love, loss, and grief called Crying in H Mart. Yeah, my eyes rolled too when I first learned of her and this bio. Thankfully, though, Zauner, the actual artist, is not a cliche. Her band, Japanese Breakfast, is actually really good and pretty darn original. They offer an electronicized blanket of dream pop, and while some of their influences may seem obvious, Flaming Lips, Hot Chip, Bjork, it all grows more beautiful and engaging as you grow more familiar with the album. Now, or with this band. Now, this album by Japanese Breakfast, Jubilee, unlike Zauner's book, is about anything but grief. It's actually quite joyous, full of big bouncy hooks, atmospheric psychedelia, and soft but emotive singing by Zauner. The dynamics of Jubilee are captured best in a discussion of two songs, and these are the second and third tracks on the album. The song Be Sweet lives up to its title billing with a dazzlingly catchy up-tempo dance structure and lyrics about the hope that comes with new love. The song features beguiling vocal overdubs on the chorus and echoing but supple keyboard lines. And it has a brand of confidence and reverence for the 1980s discotheque that makes me wonder if Madonna, as in the 1983-84 Madonna, is a major informer of Zauner's musical vocabulary. Be Sweet is immediately followed by Kokomo, Indiana, by far the warmest, loveliest song on the record. It's a wide-eyed pop tune driven by strings and Zauner's most straightforward singing. And lyrically, it's actually sweeter than Be Sweet, where the good memories of someone who bailed out of this, quote, flyover state, unquote, for bigger and better things, not including Zauner's protagonist, continue to predominate. Jubilee landed Japanese Breakfast on numerous publications' top 10 albums for 2020,000, those lists, 2021, those lists, including Rolling Stones. Now, I can see why. It's the kind of poppy, upbeat remix of orthodox radio pop that the current crop of fanboy wannabes critics love. Now, while I wouldn't quite put the album that high up on the list, it is a very good, very fun, and just a very nice record. It's quite an accomplishment for Japanese Breakfast and for Zauner, who defies all of the conventions that you would expect from her bio. The end. Arturo, I'm going to guess, since I know you're not much of a Lipson fan in general, that you probably hate this record.
This album was nominated for a Grammy for Best Alternative Rock
Yes.
Album. Now, I kind of have a general rule of thumb. If the Grammy committee likes it, it automatically sucks.
There you go.
And this is basically what this is. I mean, seriously, I mean, didn't we have enough of the retro 80s synth pop revival in the early teens? It started in the noughties. It continued into the early teens, and we're now in the early 20s. Isn't there another decade you can like get music and be inspired from than the 1980s? There are
Yeah.
there are other decades out there, people. There are other decades out there that you can mine from. Okay?
Yeah, I know, but there's not a whole lot of bands that are doing it like this anymore. I mean,
Yes,
like
yes, there are. That's the thing. This album is so fucking derivative. It is so just like it's so vanilla and plastic, and its sweetness is exactly what I think stinks. It's just generic sweetness. I mean, I agree with you that Kokomo song is pretty decent. It's got it's got a sweet little, country folk rock, tinge to it, which really makes it stand out from the rest of the record. The rest of the record to me is just monotonous, generic retro '80s synth pop, of which there are many people who are, many artists in indie rock doing this now, trying to pass it as indie rock when it's just retro '80s synth pop. Oh no, oh hey, yeah, the lead singer is kind of cute. Okay, big deal.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a good way to put it. But no, there's not nearly as much of this as there was, say, like 20 years ago or 10 years ago. And yes, I mean, you do have a couple of artists out there that still mine this as a sort of dance rock thing. For what it's worth, we've talked about in the last year 2 albums from very good, very original artists who decided that they would wear this jacket for themselves. We're talking about Ty Segall and King Gizzard and the Wizard, that both did their take on sort of '80s dream pop here recently, and we can't wait for them to go back to what they are actually good at. you know?
Why doesn't the music community in general just retire '80s dream pop for at least 10 years or 7 years?
Yeah,
Just retire it. Do something else.
yeah. I don't know. I mean, I guess for whatever reason. I mean, look, if I'm saying that Madonna's 83, 84 period, the dress you up period is an influence on this girl, then that's not a terrible thing because that stuff is actually pretty indelible. It's not just of its era. I mean,
Yeah,
Holiday
yeah,
and
yeah. But the difference is Madonna actually, in my opinion, was a really good songwriter with a knack for a hook and a melody that, no offense, Mrs. Honor here really doesn't have, in my opinion.
oh, she's got the knack. I mean, she's got the knack for the hooks. I don't know about the melodies, but definitely the hooks. She's definitely not on the melodies. She's not Madonna's equal, but I know I think the hooks are pretty roundly, pretty strong on this record.
Nah, I still think it's just retro revival '80s synth pop mush, and it's the kind of stuff that, like, I'm just so sick of hearing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, hey, it's reverent, but I don't think it's mushy. I've heard mushier. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, that doesn't say much.
Well, okay. Well, then there you go. So, and with that, we leave the parallel universe now, which I guess in Arturo's mind means we leave mush behind. That the mush lives in the parallel universe, not in this one, at least in his mind. So here we are again, Arturo. Uh, we're going to be talking about two of our favorite artists, or at least one of our favorite artists and his ex-wife today, Richard and Linda Thompson,
Yeah.
in the latest entry in our series, a legacy. So
Yes.
fill us in on what to expect.
Yeah, like you said, this episode is the second in what we call our legacy series. Pearl Jam was the first one several episodes ago, and in this series, we take an artist slash band that many of you, the listeners, probably don't think of normally as having a towering influence on rock and roll, and we make the case that yes, they absolutely, undoubtedly do have a towering influence on not just rock music but other and ensuing generations of bands and artists, no question. Now, for this installment, Chris and I will tackle one of the most criminally underrated and overlooked artists in the history of rock, regardless of subgenre, and that is Richard Thompson. And in this particular case, his albums with his ex wife, Linda Thompson. Now, before we go into this, let me say that all you listeners out there, we acknowledge this is a very obscure, niche choice. This is not this is not an artist that most people or even most of our listeners are familiar with. But if you are on our Facebook page or in our Facebook group page, you will have seen several entries that Chris and I have both put up of Richard and Linda live performances and or Richard and Linda studio tracks. And we've kind of like we've met several of them throughout the past week and a half or the past 2 weeks to kind of provide some context for our listeners who are not familiar with Richard and Linda Thompson, and many people are not, and understandably so. I get it. So please, we really hope you have taken the time to watch and listen to some of the videos that Chris and I have posted regarding Richard and Linda. So you get a sense of the kind of music they did before Chris and I geek out and go wholeheartedly into the discography of one of our favorite artists of all time. So, anyway, so back to who is this guy, Richard Thompson? Well, this guy is a virtuoso guitarist and a songwriter and a lyricist and a singer on a genius level. He's a quadruple threat, one comparable to Bob Dylan or Neil Young or Joni Mitchell or Bruce Springsteen or Tom Waits or anyone else of his generation. He emerged from the legendary English folk rock pioneers Fairport Convention in the early 1970s to create a series of stunning folk rock albums with his then wife, Linda, that defy time, they defy space, they defy convention. It's a body of work that contains masterpiece upon masterpiece upon masterpiece. And they really, really, really should be lauded and appreciated by younger generations of musicians and music critics and music geeks for infinity. As a folk rock duo, Richard and Linda were legitimately the UK's answer to Simon and Garfunkel. Well, actually, scratch that. Linda had way more wattage than Art Garfunkel as a singer. Who had one, well, Garfunkel basically had one famous, astounding lead turn, but was otherwise, let's face it, the second part of a two-part harmony with Paul Simon. Really, the only thing more underrated than Thompson's music and artistry is the profound influence and effect his music, particularly his album streak with Linda, had on legions of noteworthy and well known artists and bands throughout the years, many of whom we will mention and quote from later on. If you aren't familiar with Richard Thompson, aside from the bits that we've posted on Facebook, especially his run of 6 albums with Linda Thompson, then you should be. And yours truly, Curmudgeon, sincerely hope that this very special episode will help fill the gigantic hole in your record collection or your Spotify playlist. Hell, maybe we'll keep you sleepless for days glued to YouTube. The guy is an incredible live performer as well.
There's always a good time to be found within the Curmudgeon Rock Report's Curmudgeonly community. That is our invite-only private Facebook group that Arturo and I launched in December. So far, it's been a spirited romp through this podcast's decidedly bent worldview, and as it turns out, through those of our members as well. Now, is Iron Maiden a good example of a band that blended muso mastery and pop accessibility to an acceptable degree? Well, one of our members sure thinks so, and we gave him the safe space to do it, damn it. If bold opinions and thoughts and passionate defenses of rock and roll are your jam, then the Curmudgeon Rock Report's Curmudgeonly community is for you. Come find us, and we will probably let you in. So, let's set this up, folks. We're talking about Richard and Linda Thompson. Richard Thompson being one of the great British musical minds of the last 50 or 60 years. But he knew that he wanted to march to a different drummer. There's a reason you may not have heard of him, is because he chose to defy convention rather than go with it. Last year, he released a new memoirs, a very good little book called Bee Swing. We recommend that you pick it up from your local record store or indie bookstore. It's about 275 pages. I myself read it in a day. He talks a little bit about the first time that he came over to America to play shows with his forerunner band, Fairport Convention. And on page, I think it's 141 of the book, he says, quote, "We weren't as sexy as the Stones or as lovable as Herman's Hermits or Freddie and the Dreamers. And most importantly, we were not recycling recognizable American styles. If audiences there were going to like us, they'd have to take a step in our direction." Now, for a guy who professes in the book to suffer from low self-esteem for the first part of his life, that was a really confident posture to take. And it was a spirit that grew along with this ever-developing talent as an artist. With that said, Prelude, when Richard met Linda. Arturo, take it from here.
Yeah. A little bit more about Fairport Convention because they really do deserve some mentioning. Thompson started his career with them as one of their guitarists. He was with them from 1967 to 1970. They started out basically, being 1967. They started out, and the media pegged them as the British answer to Jefferson Airplane. What they ended up being was the British answer to the Birds.
Yep.
And this is in their pioneering in their country, their fusion of folk music and rock, whereas the Birds took traditional American folk music, fused it with rock, later on country rock. What the Fairports did was take traditional English folk music, and which nobody was really doing at the time, and they fused it with electric rock instrumentation. Guitar, bass, drums. Throw in a fiddle, and you have some pretty rockin' English folk music.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
They had a great run of albums. The first album, self-titled Fairport Convention, is their least folk rock record. It's got kind of a jazzy swing to it. But then Sandy Denny, the legendary English folk singer, joined them for a run of 3 albums through 1969. What We Did in Our Holidays, Unhalf Bricking, and of course the immortal Liege and Leaf, one of the greatest folk rock albums ever made any country by anyone. So all 3 of those albums all came out the same year. Richard talks a lot about this in his memoir about his time during this, him in the band during this time. In 1970, Sandy Denny left the group. And the way Richard says, they kind of wanted her gone.
Yeah, they fired her.
Yeah, they fired her. Yeah.
Yeah, essentially because her focus wasn't with the music, and I guess the guy she was with at the time was seen as being more of a hindrance, and they all thought that he'd end up taking over the band. And
Yeah.
sure enough, him and her and that dude ended up as their own act. Like a year later. One thought about Fairpoint, and we'll be mentioning this book a lot because it's fresh in our minds, and obviously it's germane to the subject. Richard Thompson talks about him being very, very influenced, and the rest of the band, by music from Big Pink, by the band, and essentially he says in there that it's one thing. It's okay to have a talent for mimicry, but at some point you have to find a way to be original. And so what they did is they took the music from Big Pink construct and what the band was doing with American and North American folk styles and tradition, and they applied it to British folk music and tradition, especially Scottish and Northern England and those folk influences. So, like you said, it's the rock backbone, but with those parochial Celtic and other and Scotch and other influences. So that's pretty fascinating to me that they made that marriage.
Yeah, and it was really influential to a lot of artists and bands later on. It was a big inspiration. Members of Fairport went on to form Steel Eye Span, and there were a couple of other folk rock groups. Oh, Pentangle, kind of like. Although their first album came at the same year as Fairport, and they were doing the English folk before. But Fairport, their brand of English folk rock, rocked a little more than Pentangle, whereas Pentangle was more of a jazz folk fusion.
Yeah,
thing.
well, exactly. One, it rocked harder, but 2, it was more English, man.
Yeah.
and the Scotch. I mean, it was the northern part of the UK where they got a lot of their influences from. Which we'll talk a little bit about more in
Yeah.
depth later.
Yeah. Well, needless to say, Richard Thompson left the band in late 1970, and after that, Fairport just became a medieval minstrel band, playing
Yeah.
nothing but medieval English folk music nonstop in infinitum. you
Yeah,
know,
let's just put it this way: if you ever need a soundtrack for your rent fair or a house band for your rent fair, call those brothers up. Yeah.
yeah, RT, as we refer to him, Richard. And throughout 1971, he was basically every English folk musician's session musician and touring musician. Spent the
Yep.
whole year on tour and in the studio. Eventually, came out with his first solo album, Henry the Human Fly, in 1972, which phenomenally flopped. But
Oh yeah.
really, it's really not that bad. It's really
It's
not
it's
that
pretty
bad.
good. I mean, basically, yeah, it's Thompson's first efforts at being out in front with his own songwriting because he's forming his own voice as a songwriter at this period. And again, he talks about in the book he suffered from low self esteem, and I think it was when he couldn't, he had his ambitions to go out on his own and do his own thing and be up on stage. Well, once you're on stage and it's your own thing, well, you can't hide anymore. You can't be you can't be the shy gawky geek in the back.
Right.
You have to kind of come out of that. And so I guess this is his first foot forward. And it's yeah, like you said, it's pretty good. But I love his line about it is that it was met with universal indifference. Yeah,
Listen,
yeah.
the Angels Took My Racehorse Away is a great song. Look it
Oh
up,
yeah,
anybody.
yes, yeah. It absolutely is. But it's good, but it's the unpolished diamond uh,
Sure.
portion of it. It took about 2 years from that to when we get to his first record with Linda Peters or Thompson, nay Peters, that it really starts to gel and become wholly incredibly unique.
Speaking of Linda, Chris, around
Why,
the,
yes,
around this time is when they started out as friends and then slowly evolved into a romantic relationship until they got married in 72.
yes, yeah. Linda was good friends. I mean, Linda was a singer who was in that scene. Gorgeous singer. I mean, just unbelievable voice with just a real talent for expressing the emotions of other people's work. But she's buddies with Sandy Denny and with several other folks in the scene, and they're hanging around. They knew each other. I think, they had a mutual interest in Scottish uh, uh, tradition and history and art and culture. Uh, Linda was actually from Glasgow or
Yeah.
Glasgow or however they say it over there.
Glasgow.
Glasgow. Okay. Uh, so they ended up getting together from there, and like she said, she was career backup singer and career uh, side artist, and both of them never out in front.
Right.
They have incredible talent and have this incredibly rich musical vocabulary, and they have that bond, but they've never been out in front, and now they've met each other, and that's really where it started. And you'll get into this in a second, but the reason he quit on Sandy Denny, he was obviously he was a session musician, but his steadiest gig was working for Sandy Denny as part of
Right.
her band on her solo career. Reason that he quit is because he wanted to spend more time with Linda. He didn't want to
Right.
be on the road for months,
Yeah.
and so that's kind of where it started. But what other thoughts do you have on Fairport and about this period where he meets Linda?
Yeah, I gave them all except for one more, and the last one I'll make. I want to dispel a myth. In music circles, there is a rumor and a myth that Richard Thompson was offered the position of being one of the guitarists in the Eagles. I'm going to paraphrase from the book. I'm not going to quote it exactly, but this is basically what happened. And this is Richard's words. In 1971, that the session musician year, basically, he was on tour with I think it was Sandy Denny or someone else. Anyway, he was doing a residency at the Troubadour in L.A.
Yes.
Being the guitarist for British folk musician X, whatever you want to call it. He did it for so many. And hanging out in the Troubadour, he struck up a conversation with Glenn Fry. And they were saying, "Oh yeah, Richard, yeah, you were the guy in Fairport Convention. I like your guitar playing, man." And Rich goes, "Yeah, yeah, yeah. I saw you. You were in Linda Ronstadt's band. Yeah, yeah." And then Glenn Fry told him, "Yeah, man. Well, the band that we're in, we were Linda's band, Linda Ronstadt's band, but now we have our own band and we got our own record label, and we're going to put out our first album soon. Do you want to come over our place and listen to us?" And Richard says, "Yeah, sure." So they got in his car, in Glenn's car. I would love to be a fly on the windshield listening to that
Yeah.
conversation. Glenn Fry and Richard Thompson. But anyway,
Yeah.
they end up at the Eagles headquarters house, and basically the members of the Eagles basically played the songs that would make up their first album to Richard Thompson. Richard said, "Oh yeah, man, he liked it. He liked their vocal harmonies especially." But they never directly offered him a gig in their band. That is simply not what happened, according to Richard.
Yeah.
So the performance ended, and Glenn Fry drove Richard back to the Troubadour. The end.
The end. And that's the most fortunate thing that ever happened to Randy Meisner.
Yeah.
Could you imagine Richard Thompson playing in that band alongside Fry and Bernie Leadon? I mean, that would have been a really interesting band.
Or like just have Richard Thompson songs such as "The End of the Rainbow" and "Withered and Died" sitting alongside "Peaceful, Easy Feeling" and "Take It Easy."
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say, Winslow, Arizona just got a whole lot drearier. Yeah. So one other thing that I want to just sort of share from the book that sets this up again. So he is going to strike out on his own from Sandy Denny, and him and Linda are going to do their own thing. But he offers a general thought about where he's always been and where he was at that point as far as when he's looking at the music business and the people in it. He writes, and I'll quote this, "The music world is full of arseholes." Yes, it actually says arseholes in the book.
Yeah, he's British.
Yeah. Yep. The music world is full of arseholes. Absolute, arrogant, self-serving dickheads who imagine it all revolves around them. I've met plenty, and there's plenty more that I avoid. To work for these people can be painful and usually an unmusical, unrewarding experience. Many of them are talented, many are adored by the public, who are happy to see self-confidence and egotism up there on the stage, manifesting as showmanship.
Oh.
Give me a folk club with 30 people who treat you as nothing special. And that was approximately the world I was about to enter.
I wonder who he thinks are the dickheads in rock.
Yeah, that would be an interesting discussion. I'm thinking that there might be a few of his peers. Yeah, I know that he says that his big influence, that his favorite of the London guitarists at that time was Peter Green.
Yeah.
But almost wonder if he's talking about Fleetwood Mac. I mean, that was the first act I could think of, because Fleetwood Mac is one of those bands that's had about 14 iterations.
Yeah.
And they've always had asshole frontmen. They always manage, now maybe mix an asshole too, but they always manage to get the Peter Greens and Bob Welches and Lindsey Buckinghams and Stevie Nicks and all those. These are not like the nicest people.
You could be talking about Pink Floyd and Roger Waters.
Well, that it would definitely fit. The guy who wrote an album about how miserable his life was on the road that made him feel like he should be a fascistic dictator.
Yeah. And had the audacity to compare being a rock star to being Hitler. Yeah. Great. Very tasteful, Roger. Anyway.
Yeah, he's an arsehole.
On this episode, Chris and I extolled the virtues of the criminally underrated Richard Thompson and his brilliant run of albums with his then wife, Linda. For the next episode, the Curmudgeons will take on the Herculean task of defending one of the most derided and criticized albums, both critically and by fans, by a major rock band ever made. I'm talking about Metallica and their 2003 classic, well, at least a classic to our curmudgeonly ears, Saint Anger. Not only will we make the case that this is truly a great underappreciated album, we'll also make a case for how inventive and original it is. one of the most original in Metallica's discography. But we'll also make the case that it's one of their top 3 or 5 greatest albums. Yeah, we're going that far. Join us for the next episode as the Curmudgeons make the case. Email us at curmudgeonrock@gmail.com or hit us up on Twitter at @curmudgeonpod. All right, the first album that Richard and Linda did together is called I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight. It came out in early 1974, but it was recorded 1 year earlier in early 1973. Chris, take us to the story of this album. What happened?
Okay, so this is the beginning of Richard Thompson and Linda Thompson's journey as solo artists. For context, Richard and Linda, I believe, are both 25 at this period. They're both mid-20s, about more or less my mom's age.
Yeah.
And so they're about to strike out on their own. They've both been the potted plants to the left, very talented potted plants to the left, but they've never been front and center. And now here is their opportunity. Now, for as much as Richard might have enjoyed going back into the clubs and honing that sound, I mean, that's what they spent most of 72 and 73 doing, is kind of being in those clubs, being part of that folk rock scene, what was left of it at that point, and getting that enjoyment and cutting their teeth as their own act. But now it came time. They had been signed to Island Records. I guess Chris Blackwell was a big fan of theirs, and they have this opportunity to make this record. So even while there's some liberation and growth as an artist, there's still pressure because this is their first standalone statement, and out of the gate, they had to hit it strong. In B-Swing, Thompson talks about the kind of pressure that he was in. He has a couple of good lines. One where he says basically where, parents, partners, and friends, they rarely understand that staring blankly out of the window is an important part of the creative process and only occasionally an excuse for doing nothing. And then he also, and I thought this was maybe the most telling line in the entire book. This is much later in the book, like towards the end, where he says, songwriting is a strange business, and those who claim to understand the creative process are usually uttering bullshit of the first magnitude. And so with that, he's under the pressure, but he's got the chops and he's developed these songs and he's got that sound. And one thing you also have to understand too, as backdrop to this, Richard and Linda, they never sold that much. And even the Fairports, most of that scene, it wasn't what was going to sell. I mean, remember T-Rex is blowing up at this point, and so and Bowie and all that. So even when they're on Island Records, they're not gonna get that much money. They're not gonna get that much love, and so they never, throughout the course of their career, they never had the luxury of time or a budget in making any of these records, which really kind of gives them a raw and realer feel. Because look, they couldn't afford to fake the kind of depth that you get on this record and the others that followed. You can't fake it because you don't have time, you don't have money, and you can't fuck around. And so they go into this with the blueprint and the songs. And what is that blueprint? What are those songs? So at this point, Richard is to the point where they still want to celebrate turn of the century British folk rock, and we're talking about
folk music, not rock. Turn of the century rock.
Folk music, baby. Folk music. Yes. And so the idea is to meld that top of the century folk music with modern day rock. And so one of his missions on this record and in basically the template that followed was to take all of that stuff, the crumb horns, the dulcimers, the windwood instruments, the accordion, the flutes, the mandolins, and all of that traditional instrument, and tuck his guitar in there, whether electric or acoustic, and have it just shine just as much, be just as beautiful, and get just as much respect. And I think that was a mission of his. And so That's what happened here. It was very reverent, with stuff like When I Get to the Border and the title song, I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight. For the latter, they actually used a real silver band, as they called it.
Yeah.
These silver bands outside of Manchester, which are, this very sort of happy, peppy marching music.
Right.
Think like piccolos, and yeah, lots of light wind woods, and and brass, and they came in and played there, and so this is a very unique, very deep, very poetic record that melds those two styles beautifully. They had this real gift, that their themes generally were uh, joy, sorrow, sorrow rendered as joy, and joy rendered as sorrow. I mean, that's really the kind of the best way that you can describe the thematic and emotional fabric that runs through Richard and Linda's catalog. And so, with that said, Arturo, what are your thoughts and observations and analysis of this record?
Yeah. Chris, you just gave our listeners the in the time analysis and background information as if you were there in 1973 and 74. What I'm going to try and do is give a modern analysis with modern ears.
Yes.
If there is such a thing as the definitive quote unquote Richard Thompson album, this is it. And it's the one that is frequently put on best album ever lists. It's hard to think of another album with overriding themes of depression, hopelessness, loneliness, and overall being down and out that does a better job of actually being a soothing balm for
Yep.
listeners predisposed to that oh so existential feeling of being in this shit sandwich we call life. You know,
Yep.
like seriously, like what is it about sad, depressing songs that make us want to listen to them when we're feeling sad and depressed? If you think your life sucks, listen to the characters in Richard Thompson songs.
Yeah. Yeah. That
You'll
is the
feel a
thing.
lot better.
But at the same time, like I said, it's sorrow rendered as
Yeah,
joy.
sure,
I mean,
sure. Yeah,
like When I Get to the Border and some of the stuff in there, Hallelujah and some of the We Sing Hallelujah and some of the other things where you get this. It's almost like a jaunty
yeah,
instrumentation,
yeah,
but like you said, but with a bleak, almost sarcastically or sardonic take on life. But
yeah.
it's a good mix, and so when you listen to it, the first thing you're going to notice is uh, it's just incredibly accessible. I know
Oh, yeah.
we've not made it sound like that because we're talking about silver bands and dulcimers and all this other stuff, but it's uh, it, the rocking stuff rocks. The ballad stuff actually evokes emotions. There are a couple of songs on that album that routinely make me cry when I hear them, or almost choke up. So the emotion is real. The instrumentation is top notch, but it's accessible, and it's just an awesome listen. It's the kind of thing that once we turn you on to this record, folks, you're going to be listening to it on repeat for a while.
And let me go through a little rundown of the album for
Sure.
those who haven't run it, or sorry, haven't heard it. The opening track, "When I Get to the Border," is this rousing, glorious piece of shimmering, almost Birdsian folk rock, whose declaration of joyousness is at finally crossing, quote unquote, to the other side. Could be literally crossing the border to another country, or figuratively crossing over to a happier state of mind and being. And considering it was around this time that the Thompsons were immersing themselves with Sufi Islam, and that joyousness at finally crossing to the other side is undermined by the logical implication that the things really aren't so good on this side, quote unquote. The Calvary Cross is one of the finest examples of Thompson's unique guitarist's gift of blending virtuosity and restraint, showing off the Middle Eastern tones that would go on to be a staple of his playing.
Yes.
Again, exposure to Sufi Islam. You have "Withered and Died" with its chorus of "My dreams have withered and died" is about as uplifting as the title suggests.
Yeah.
But in no way does it take away from one of the most nakedly emotional and gorgeous melodies that Thompson ever came up with, alongside Linda's beautifully sympathetic vocals that make you realize that doleful isn't such a bad word. You have the title track with its odd mixture of plaintiveness, joyousness, and desperation. Kind of repeats the same mood as the opening track, but with a hooky horn section that you discussed earlier, Chris. The little beggar girl would seem to the untrained ear, untrained meaning not familiar with the wry wit and subtle humor of traditional English folk music, to be a trite and frivolous affair, but is actually a character examination of the dark anger and desperation that comes with poverty. Other songs, such as Down Where the Drunkards Roll, Has He Got a Friend for Me, and The End of the Rainbow, would be dreary folk dirges in any other artist's hands. With Richard's beautiful chord progressions and Linda's voice that not only breathe life into these sad characters, but makes the listener almost empathize with them. They actually make sadness and loneliness seem like noble and worthwhile crosses to bear.
Yeah, and
Um,
it's interesting. You're right, because it's a very hopeful record.
in a weird way, yeah.
Yeah, in a very strange way, despite all of these sort of bleak and downtrodden characters, all of these things that happened, like even the great Valerio, who's the tightrope walker. It's
And,
not.
and by the way, a trapeze artist contemplating suicide. If you
Yeah.
think about what a trapeze artist actually does, the
Yep.
suicide angle is some seriously dark, mordant humor. If you think
Yeah.
about it,
But we also never actually get the answer as to
yeah,
whether he actually fell or held on, or whether he grabbed back onto the rope. And so that's what makes it so. It's this odd combination of desperation but hope.
yeah,
That
sure,
almost as if it's leaving it at the point of it's your choice, folks.
yeah,
So
yeah,
you
yeah,
might as well choose life. And so it's a wry, like you said, wry is a good word for Richard Thompson too. It's a wry cliffhanger
yeah.
to leave the
And
album on.
in the end, all I want to say in the end, if this sounds like like you and I, Chris, have gone over almost every single song on the album, that is because it is an album worth listening to all the way through, in the running order that Richard and Linda intended, not in the quote unquote just send me the links to a couple of tracks mentality that a lot of music listeners have these days. Oh, by the way, Richard and Linda's song Hallelujah, better than Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah. So there.
So they get some moderate enough moderate success. Funny story is it took this album about 5 months to actually get released,
Yeah.
because as it turns out, well, this was during a period where there was an oil crisis, a big oil shock in 1973. So there legitimately was a shortage of vinyl.
Yeah.
There wasn't enough petroleum to make the vinyl records, and so there was a delay in shipment of vinyl records. Uh, Turns out, though, Thompson figures that it was their A&R man that was not exactly enthused by their stuff,
Right.
and basically, as soon as that guy left Island Records, lo and behold, their record hits the shelves. So it got out there, it got them some acclaim, it got them a few bucks. But at this point, and Arturo alluded to this, this is where they get into Sufism. And Sufism, it's a sect or a branch of Islam that has its own spiritual code, and it's not it's sort of it takes a little bit from Sunni and a little bit from Shiite, and it's its own corner, and it's a really hardcore reverence of Muhammad and God and Allah. In other words, the Sufis are very serious about the worship.
Yeah.
There's not as much politics. They are very, very, very serious about the worship, but also there's a
They're very pacifist too. They're
yeah,
very,
yeah, and very pacifist.
they're kind of hippie actually. They're
Yeah,
like Muslim hippies.
yeah. Basically, but it's like it's the purest of the spiritual sense. When you're worshiping God, the Sufis, at least on the surface, they aim to cut out all the other bullshit.
Right.
That it's between you and God and the practices of worshiping God. And this is the purest distillation, we think, of how you get closer to God. Now, Thompson, in his book and in other interviews over the years, has talked about it. By the time he's 25, 26, he's a seeker. He's drinking too much. He's feeling a little empty. He's trying to find himself. And, through some connections or through just talking to folks, he finds this Sufi community there in London. And over the course of 5 years, he gets more and more entrenched and deeper into this sect, or this local sect of Sufi Muslims. And so this is going on, and this is the backdrop to when he's making uh, Richard and Linda's next two records, Hokey Pokey and Pour Down Like Silver.
Yeah.
Hokey Pokey comes first. Hokey Pokey is a fun record. Uh, it's probably their jauntiest record. It's
Yeah.
it's very upbeat. It's got not just wry sense of humor, but kind of slyly dirty humor
Yeah.
that goes through it. He says in the book, and you can hear it. And I never thought about it before, but you can really hear it. There's the Middle Eastern influences, which Arturo mentioned, and this is where it really takes off. The stuff from Tunisia, Morocco, and Algeria, otherwise known as Andalusia,
Right.
uh, and those sort of rhythms, the cliche rhythms, but in Thompson's hands, they were anything but cliche. And then also music hall, which is essentially British vaudeville. It's from the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and sort of British theater music, and it's got that kind of
Yeah.
think like sort of a marching music kind of beat. So he
Basically, the kind of stuff that Kinks would explore greatly.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. If there's any of those British heavyweights that Richard and Linda approach the most, it's probably the Kinks.
Yeah.
Or at least this period Kinks of basically the same time.
Yeah.
Right around the same time, 74, 75. So Hokey Pokey. So you take those two influences, and that's really what defines the music. The title song may or may not be penile or erectile in its themes.
Yeah.
Uh, who knows? I mean, it hints at it strongly. But then you've got songs like Never Again. There, Thompson, when he is 20 or 21 in 1969, is in a car accident, kills his girlfriend at the time, and kills a bandmate of his in Fairport. Left a mark, and so he explores that theme. So here again, we have this sort of spirited, jaunty, party sort of uplifting attitude, but then also this sort of contemplative, uh, grieving, thoughtfulness and bleakness. And so
Mm.
there is that sort of again, and you get that there's that tension in a lot of their records where
Yeah.
sometimes the joy is real joy, and sometimes the joy is uh, about as satirical as it gets.
Yeah.
But here, I'd say it's more sort of uh, it's not as unified as I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight, but I think it has those two poles, that joy on the one end and sort of almost solemnity on the other. I think that the poles are pretty pronounced on this record. Would you agree?
Yeah. If you're a youngster, a listener of ours, which I doubt you are, but if you are, if you're listening with young ears, this is basically Hokey Pokey. If you just listen to the music on this album, just the music, with all, like you said, Chris, the jaunty rhythms, the upbeat pub sing-alongs, and traditional English music hall melodies, you would think this is the optimistic, sunny side up answer to the bleakness of I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight. Wrong. A cursory listen to the lyrics reveals an album that is quite thematically cohesive in its two-way portrayal of the harshness and cruelty of life. It's either people having harsh and cruel things done to them, or people escaping this harshness and cruelty by delving into a life of sex, drugs, or materialism. That's what runs throughout this record, lyrically speaking. Thompson's brilliance as a writer is underscored by the fact that while all these character studies and vignettes could fall into being preachy and accusatory, he provides just enough sympathy that allows the listener to at least understand why these characters made their choices. As a recently converted religious person, Thompson was at this time, this is in stark contrast to say George Harrison and his more spiritual material, much of which, in my opinion, is heavy-handed, self-righteous, and a bit overly pious. um, the title and opening track, like you said, Chris, Hokey Pokey, it's one of his most audacious songs in how, for Thompson standards, practically drips with salacious metaphors. The ice cream man peddling his ice cream cones, get it?
Yeah.
and all the sexual double entendre all throughout. Now, don't let that swaying, jaunty melody and deliciously nasty guitar solo fool you. The lyric is a rather puritanical commentary on how sex is used and abused, not just for commercial purposes, but for emotional manipulation and psychological control. I'll Regret It All in the Morning is one of the most harrowing depictions of domestic abuse ever recorded, ranking right up there with some of the best old country, blues, and folk songs. What makes it especially effective is how Thompson doesn't lay blame nor justify actions. He just describes what happens from both partners' perspectives and ends the song with the strong implication that the cycle will continue. Nope, folks, no happy endings in Richard Thompson's world.
Nope.
Georgie on a Spree continues the musical motif of upbeat music and somber lyrics. This one of a young girl who has her materialistic, rich girl dreams fulfilled a little too soon in life, only to have it dashed when her Prince Charming ditches her. The sun never shines on the poor is a pretty self-explanatory. Brilliant lyric, quote, but most of the people, they're poor in the heart. It's the worst kind of poor you can be. And it really grooves along with a rhythm taken straight from a Mexican mariachi, something you would never identify with Richard Thompson.
No, not really.
Old Man Inside a Young Man is the kind of soaring, anthemic folk ballad that Thompson was becoming known for at this time, complete with its misanthropic lyric about giving up on life after being taken advantage of one too many times. Toward the end of the album is one of the few tracks written pre-Islamic conversion, A Heart Needs a Home. It's an exquisite, tender acoustic ballad about finding refuge in a world determined to just shit on you and leave you alone.
Yeah, wonderful song.
Yeah, oddly enough, the song itself is quite a refuge from all the bleakness of the lyrics on the album. A bleakness that I argue surpasses that of the previous album simply because of how pointed and specific it is with its character-driven songs.
Oh, certainly lyrically.
Lyrically. That's my point. This album is the right tonic for those people who ascribe to the words of Kurt Cobain from his song Francis Farmer Will Have His Revenge on Seattle. I miss the comfort of being sad.
Yeah, I mean that actually is a good connection. And like I said, it's the jauntiest kind of sadness there is. So, as we said, they're getting deeper into Sufism and they're growing up, and tastes are changing. And so, Thompson talks about this in the album that, like you said, there's this line that he's straddling on this album, on Hokey Pokey, between pre-Sufi and post-Sufi.
Yeah.
Where he says that in B-Swing, he says there's songs on that record that he wrote several months before the others that he just wasn't emotionally in tune with anymore.
Right.
And so it was kind of a strange exercise. But that wasn't the strangest exercise to come. That comes next, with which I think personally, in my old age, I've come to think is probably their best record, Pour Down Like Silver. Yeah. It's not their most, it's not their most revered. It's not their most popular. It's not anything that got them on the map, but it's basically just perfect. So to set this up, they're essentially back to square one. At this point, again, Richard is starting to shut out the outside world. He's not watching Top of the Pops anymore. At this point, T-Rex and glam metal, and we're on the precipice of Judas Priest at this point. We're somewhere between Deep Purple and Judas Priest. So
we're on the precipice of punk rock.
And we're on the precipice of punk rock, but he's leaving that all behind. Like literally, he's now wanting to hold on to what he's had musically, meaning the that hybrid of folk and rock. But he also wants to leave behind what he had physically. Again, he stopped drinking cold turkey. He wants to leave behind pretension as he knew it, which is kind of funny because he replaced it with a different kind of pretension because he was buying all this Asian shit, and all this Asian furniture and stuff. And he had to leave some friends behind. And he also wants to nurture himself spiritually through Sufism. The problem with that, though, is that Sufis are very hardcore about respecting God and disavowing the temptations of the world. And so they had they're kind of like the Southern Baptists of Islam. They kind of look down at secular romantic rock and roll, or just rock and roll in general, So Thompson, as he's getting drawn in, is having to walk this fine line where he has to find a way to make his message universal enough so that it could go either way. Either this is a song about relationship uplift or a relationship breaking apart, or about your relationship with God or your spiritual bent in life. And so it's probably not a coincidence that the first song on this record is called Streets of Paradise.
Yeah.
Which awesome song. It's a rocking song. In terms of the recording of this record, much like I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight and Hokey Pokey, it was recorded very quickly and very cheaply. But on this record, unlike those records, on those he mostly overdubbed his solos. On the first couple of records, and with Fairport and Sandy Denny, his solos would generally be overdubbed, over the basic tracks. Here, they didn't do any overdubbing because Thompson explains in B Swing, and he's explained in interviews over the years that it just wouldn't have been that compatible. So a lot of it is him actually playing some of those solos live. Along with some of these songs, and it gives it a real power. I think this is the sparest of the records. It's the rawest, but it's also in an odd way the most rocking. And it also has, I think, his most precise, engaging, hypnotic guitar work. It's been covered. There's stuff that's been covered on this album by other artists like Bonnie Raitt.
Dimming of the Day has been covered by like 10 different people.
Yes, but most famously by Bonnie Raitt in 1994. And it's the acoustic guitar playing on that, and just the technical playing and the recording of it is just extraordinary. And so again, it's this quick hit, low budget, low time. In and out, but they are just on, and they are at their peak. I especially am a big fan of Night Comes In, which I guess I'll leave it for you to talk about the specifics. Yeah. But again, I think that this album just has a muscle to it and a confidence to it that really is at their peak. I think it's a perfect album.
I agree. All right, so what do you do when the leader of the religious sect you belong to, in this case, one Sheikh Abdul Qadir, forbids you to perform music, particularly on the electric guitar? Well, when you're one of the world's greatest, albeit most unheralded, guitarists and songwriters, you're in a bit of a shitty predicament, especially when you owe your record label, Island Records, one more album. So a compromise was made between Thompson and his spiritual guru, in that all the songs on this album would be spiritual songs, or songs aimed at Allah as their source of inspiration and purpose of devotion. Otherwise, he wasn't allowed to do what he loved most, and did best. Ah, religion.
Yep.
Anyway, what stands out about this album to me, and you alluded to this, Chris, from all the other Richard and Linda albums, is how stark and sparse it is. Yeah, the electric guitar is there, as is by the now standard accordion. But aside from acoustic guitars, bass, drums, and there isn't much else. A trumpet here, a clarinet there, a violin there, but they never seem to be intrusive nor blend in to flesh out the sound as they do in the previous two albums. And considering how the album as a whole is supposed to be about solemn devotion to a higher power, that sparseness and no frills, bone dry production is actually pretty appropriate. It's a testament to Thompson's genius as a songwriter that these songs were all written in a way that can really easily be interpreted by secular listeners, such as myself, as moving romantic love songs. Many Christian musicians have tried this through the years to rather crappy effect, coming across as lunkheaded, heavy handed, and utterly lacking in nuance, taste, or restraint. The opposite of this is precisely what makes Thompson one of the greatest songwriters who ever lived.
Pretty much. Yep.
Yeah. You have now rundown tracks. Big, rousing, anthemic sing alongs with powerful choruses is by now a Richard and Linda staple. And Streets of Paradise, like you said, is one of the very best they ever came up with. For Shame of Doing Wrong has some of the most arresting interplay between electric guitar and accordion on any Thompson recording. And if you didn't already know this, this was about Allah. Linda and Richard's passionate vocal interplay would have you think this is one of the best romantic longing songs ever. It's
Nope.
crazy. Jet Plane in a Rocking Chair is, at this point in their careers, the closest this duo ever came up with a genuine potential pop hit
Oh
out
yeah.
of their heady English folk rock brew. Seriously, speed up the tempo a little, add some fiddles, and you can totally imagine Dolly Parton and Porter Wagner knocking this out at the Grand Ole Opry.
Oh, that's a good call.
That's
I didn't
what
think
this
about that,
is.
but that's a
You know,
good call. Yeah.
you know. Beat the Retreat, arguably the centerpiece of the album, is starker than stark, but also one of the most hauntingly beautiful augmentations of melody and lyric in the duo's entire catalog.
Yeah.
It's a note for note perfect album, like you said, Chris, and deserving of every bit of the praise heaped on I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight. In fact, the first three Richard and Linda albums, the first three of the streak of six, garnered extremely positive reviews in their time, albeit with really poor sales.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, in the years following this trilogy of records, before they went on their 2.5 year hiatus, which you will talk about very soon, Chris, it's quite easy to imagine the massive influence these albums had on artists in ensuing years, such as REM, Lucinda Williams, Bonnie Prince Billy, Wilco, and Laura Marling. Like, I can't imagine these artists without these three Richard and Linda albums.
Your resident Curmudgeons recently switched our hosting platform to Podbean, and what a move it's proving to be. For the equivalent of $9 a month, we get quality, reliable hosting that allows us to distribute the Curmudgeon Rock Report wide and far to all the places where you find all of the other podcasts. We also get to customize a pretty good website. Visit us at curmudgeonrock.podbean.com. And we also receive some excellent statistics that tell us when and how you listen to this here creation. Most importantly, Podbean is its own community of podcasters and opens us and you to some pretty incredible music podcasts besides this incredible one. We urge you to especially check out History in 5 Songs with prolific writer Martin Popoff and Song Exploder, which expertly guides listeners through the making of a great pop song. Podbean, it ain't bad. And so that ends their Island chapter. Like I said, Chris Blackwell had signed Richard. They were enthusiastic. Well, at least they were, the good artists, while they were out there building Marley and whoever else. Richard Thompson was kind of, we'll support you artistically, but the combination of them being, like you said, a niche, hey, remember Fairport? Well, sort of, kind of band. The combination of that and the growing devotion to God and to the Sufi sect there in London, they stopped making music for 3 years. The first couple of years, 75, 76, are spent very ensconced in what increasingly was more like a cult-like existence.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was one of those things where, okay, are we really praising God, or are we stroking the ego of the guy that's the leader of the sect? There's such a
Right.
thing. It's very prevalent in American Protestant churches, especially what they call narcissistic abuse,
Yeah.
where the church culture becomes way more about the preacher and the founder of the church than it does about actually worshiping God. Pentecostal churches, Baptist churches, especially all over the American South and the American West, over the last 40 years, it's been pretty extraordinary to see that kind of thing, and they basically suffered that. So they
Yeah.
got too far gone, and Richard caught on to this, and they bailed out after a couple of years and tried to establish their life on their own. At this point, the Sufi ethos of no music was still biting them, and so for a year after they leave the Sufi life, or the sort of the compound cult, whatever you want to call it, life, Richard works as an antiques dealer during this period.
And not a successful one.
No, well, he had gotten some leftover advance music or advance money from leftover
Right.
advance money from. That's what got him through 76.
Yeah.
And then 77, he tries to do antique stealing, and it doesn't quite work out for him. And so after 3 years away, having not really thought about music or made music or been part of the music business, they sign with the label Chrysalis,
Mm.
and they're going to make their comeback. Um, which Richard says, these next two records that we're going to talk about, he calls this the equivalent for him of being in a musical no man's land. And he describes it in the book about these Chrysalis. But First Light, which is the first record, and then Sunny Vista, which is the second. These are from 78 and 79. He says, quote, "We were trying to please an audience that did not exist, trying to please a record company that seemed to like us on the label for prestige reasons rather than because it had some idea of how to market us." And so, and I think that that's reflected in these albums. So we'll talk about the first one of these albums here. First Light. This is from 1978, and to Thompson's point about trying to please an audience that didn't exist, this album sounds like they're not exactly sure who they're trying to write for anymore. It's not as confident, and it's not as steeped in the earlier stuff, the London folk rock, top of the century folk music influence, where you get Sweet Surrender, which might as well be 70s disco traveling alongside pretty accordions. It's a fun song.
I like it.
Yeah, I mean it's strange because it's a varied record, and they don't really. Thompson, I think, is struggling to have a unified vision here, but you get Sweet Surrender, which is this great kind of up tempo, again, almost disco-y kind of song, which makes it enjoy. The idea of Richard Thompson doing disco is just smile inducing anyway.
Yeah.
But then you've got, there's one instrumental on it that's very reverent and very, like you said, Middle Eastern influenced and very folky. And then there's a couple of slower love ballads with, again, sort of empathetic character study lyrics, but it's not as unified and it's not as confident, and there's more of a mainstream. And they talk about it, they were working with some LA session musicians on this one, more than their usual cast of characters, and it's almost like they were trying to please the master in Chrysalis. And I think it reflects on that. So while I guess you could call it lesser Thompson or lesser Richard and Linda, but that's still pretty damn good.
Yeah, listen, like you said, Chris, the quote that Richard said, we were making music for an audience that didn't exist. Well, with all due respect to Richard, that audience does exist 20 to 30 to 40 years later. And
Yep,
that's me. That's me, baby. I love
absolutely.
this. I love this record. Listen, um, the two albums Richard and Linda put out in the later part of the 1970s suffer only when compared to the immaculate triptych of albums they did earlier in the decade. I would argue these couple of albums, First Light and Sunny Vista, contain some of the most beautiful, yes, moving, yes, and wait for it, catchy songs they
Oh
ever
yeah,
recorded.
no
They may
doubt.
have they may have still been members of the Islamic Sufi faith that frowned upon his music making, but oddly enough, it was on this album that Richard and Linda started to subtly inject hints of pop hooks. They never did that before. Pop hooks that would grow to beautiful fruition on the next album. But first, let's talk about First Light. Now, like the previous album, Poured Down Like Silver, all the songs are spiritual, lyrically. What can easily be interpreted as love songs or songs longing for a lover are actually longing for Allah. A few of the tracks had lyrics that were directly translated from Sufi and Quranic texts. However, at this point, who gives a shit? When they're
Mhm.
written as expertly and delivered as deftly, with as much sophisticated songcraft and exquisite musicianship and vocals as these two provide, it doesn't really matter, man. They may as well be singing odes to Ronald McDonald and Grimace, Um, the opening track, Restless Highway, it lacks the bombastic quality that usually kicks off Richard and Linda albums, but it possesses a chorus melody that soars past those other opening tracks and starts the album with an elegiac beauty only Richard Thompson can construct and that only Linda Thompson can vocalize. Um, Keep listening, and you'll get knocked aside the head with two songs in a row. The first one you mentioned, Sweet Surrender, that has a disco-ish. But the next track, Don't Let a Thief Steal Into Your Heart, is even more disco.
Yeah,
It has a more dead straight disco beat, not unlike the Eagles, One of These Nights, by the way,
yeah, which is a great
where
song. Yeah,
where Richard interestingly spices up things. This disco Richard and Linda track with a solo that sounds like, even though it probably isn't, Roger McGuinn's Birdsian jingle jangle Rickenbacker sound on
yeah.
some kind of funky steroids.
Oh yeah. I mean,
Roger McGuinn on steroids. That's the solo on "Don't Let a Thief Steal Into Your Heart."
yeah.
Great song.
That's a good point. It was almost like Thompson was angry at the song because
Yeah,
because that kind of struck me too. Is because kind of like okay, it's like kind of this corny lightweight thing, and then all of a sudden, boom,
yeah, yeah.
it's not even 12 strings; it's more like 24 strings. It just has this sort of crazy technical like how the hell is he doing that kind of like nine finger shit going on?
I know, but you know what? Even the folky shit is not ignored, though.
Nope.
The choice wife is an acoustic instrumental English folk hoedown.
Yes, and beautiful.
That wouldn't sound out of place on a Fairport Convention album, and segues into "Died for Love," a riveting showcase for Linda's vocals, whose uncanny ability to mix vulnerability, forlornness, grit, and edge. It made her one of Linda Ronstadt's favorite singers. And frankly, if you're one of Linda Ronstadt's favorite singers, you're a really good fucking singer.
Yeah, I was gonna say you're a hell of a fucking singer because
Yeah.
Ronstadt might be the greatest rock female vocalist ever. So that's high praise. So let's take while you're talking about Linda, let's just take a pause because we haven't
Yeah.
really focused on her
Yeah.
musically. She just had a real gift
Yeah.
for expressing. That she once in a great while contributed lyrics or music to Rich, but Richard did about 92% of their stuff, but it was her assignment to translate Richard's ideas, Richard's emotions, Richard's words, and his stories.
Yeah.
And she just, Richard talks about in the book, Sandy Denny was this huge talent and kind of her way or the highway type.
Yeah.
And so she wasn't as amenable to ideas or not, I don't want to call it coaching, but you know what I mean, input and maybe try this, or she wasn't as up to experimentation as Linda proved to be. I
Right.
guess, Linda was a very open-minded collaborator.
Sure.
Uh, and so she just, just that gorgeous, rich, expressive voice where she was never a shouter. Um, and she wasn't a shouter. She was never a whisperer. She wasn't one of these Celine Dion types that the like the up is up and the down is But
Yeah.
it was just a sort of very even, matter of fact storytelling, but of just a deep, rich, gorgeous, lilting voice that just gave a power. Not in the again, not the operatic power sense, but in the emotional sense. She just had that gift. She could just channel that. And you give me a story to tell, and I'll tell it in a way that you never imagined we could get there together with,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
okay,
Anyway,
but so,
it's a very good point about Linda.
yeah,
We were talking about Linda, and now I'm going to talk about Lila, a
yeah,
track on this album that brings something else new to the Thompsons' brew. And what is it? Funk. More specifically, a hybrid of funk, R&B, and funk rock with lyrics inspired by the Quran. Yes, folks, that's a first in rock and roll history.
yeah,
Funk rock with Islamic lyrics. Anyway, the album it's a great track. It's really good. I mean it. I swear. The album culminates with the title track, First Light, which is this California style country rocker sung brilliantly by Linda with a chorus melody like the first track that just really just sails to the heavens with a stirring passion and this innocent longing that can even shake this curmudgeonly atheist. In a discography of quite possibly the most criminally and terribly underrated act in rock history. This, in my opinion, is the second most underrated album in their discography.
uh, it's so he does First Light, and then the next year comes if it was a yin and a yang, this was the yang, Sunny Vista.
Yeah.
This was Thompson. He's still scratching around in the dark, and it's still a no man's land, but he's starting to get his footing now. And this album is notable because it's the first time, really, that you can say that we get from Richard and Linda Thompson modern day social satirical
Yeah.
commentary
Yeah.
on the title track, which is great. It's a tango, a modern
Yeah.
day tango, a little bit sped up, and there's a wonderful live clip on YouTube of them performing this song at a theater in 1980, where Linda says, "This is a song about how wonderful everything is. It's all pretty wonderful, isn't it?" And hint, no, no, it's not. And so this is sort of a very Kinksy kind of nod to modern dull sort of sheep mentality suburbia. And then you also get the opener, which is hilarious, but rocking and hilarious, Civilization,
Yeah.
which is up to that point may actually, like you said, it's hooky. It ain't disco. It's just flat out rock,
Yeah.
and it rocks balls. And so there's a lot more of that going on in this record. So that's the one hand, is they're starting to get more into the sort of modern look, peering at what's going around them, almost like a cynicism or an anger about the world at large. But also, this is, I think, the neatest distillation of that duality that we've talked about, that tiptoeing they did, uh, as far as equating relationships with people and the opposite sex with relationships with God. There's a wonderful 1-2 punch on this record. In the middle of it, there's you're going to need somebody, which I think is one of the top 5 songs
Oh,
they ever did.
totally. Totally.
Huh? I love
Totally,
it.
totally.
It's one of their best. It's catchy. It's tuneful. It's emotional. It's honest. But it really is. It's as uh, lovely and as awesome an orthodox song you'll ever get about evangelism. Essentially, that's what it is. I mean, this is kind of like a less jokey version of Bob Dylan's "You Got to Serve Somebody."
Yeah.
It's the same spirit. It's you're going to need somebody. Oh, who is it that you're going to need? God. I mean, that's what they're going for. But the way they do it, it's about that. You've reached the end of the rope, or you're in the struggle here in life, and so you have to turn that. And so, but it's just this. It's got this shuffling beat to it, and a confidence and assurance. The 2-part harmony that goes along with it. It's just masterful. And then the other song is "Why Do You Turn Your Back," uh, which is the opposite tack. Which is it still rocks, but it's more somber. It's basically how could you betray God, and so you
Right.
get the two sides of that coin. But they do it in the most self-assured, pop hooky way in this entire streak. So that's really. And then one other thing to mention about this record too. So again, it's made the same way. At this point, they're not working with the LA guys. They bring in more of their people, and so you get some more. You get more of the traditional touches coming back. But there's a song that ends this record or near the end of the record called "Sisters,"
Mm.
uh, which is not really about the dissolution of a longtime female between female friends. Linda Thompson tells it, and I was doing my research on this. Part of the Sufi lifestyle and worldview was polygamy, and so apparently there was some sort of sexual jealousy uh, thing going on between Linda Thompson and Anne McGonigal, who was one of the backup singers for a long time for the Thompsons, who was also involved in Sufi. And so this is one of those examples of Richard putting some pretty twisted words in his wife's mouth.
Hmm.
About
Yeah.
we had a fallout because we had a common lover, and now we can't share him anymore. Um,
But was it Richard who was this guy who had the two women, or was it someone else?
As far as I know, I mean, the way that Linda talks about it, it sounded like it was Richard. I think it was like,
Really?
yeah,
Okay.
it's. I mean, I would have to look at it again, but it seems like her whole thing was, and I can't believe this jerk made me sing this.
Yeah. See, this is the way the quote that I have. In 1996, there was a compilation of her music called "Dreams Fly Away," and this song was included. By the way, this is a gorgeous ballad for those of
Yes.
you who haven't heard it. It's a showcase for Linda's aching, pained,
Oh yeah.
soulful vocal virtuosity. Yeah, it's like they have some great ballads. This is in their top five. But anyway,
Yeah.
Linda said about this song that she revealed is not about actual sisters, like you said, Chris, but about a Muslim polygamous relationship, quote unquote. You have to be a very big person to make that work. This guy was a creep. Now, would that guy be Richard Thompson? Would she be calling him a creep like that?
Yeah. Well, that's how I read it at first, but I think if you're I mean, again, I think maybe I'd have to read those liner notes or the accompaniment that you're quoting from.
Yeah.
I'd have to read it in its full context, but that's the way it seemed like.
Hmm.
Maybe I was making an extrapolation in my mind
Right.
when he said, this guy was some kind of creep. Either that, or it's the lament that the guy in the relationship came between us.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
uh, and
Yeah.
so maybe she's talking about it in the abstract but
Right.
but who knows? Who knows? But anyway, so that's my setup on Sunny Vista. It's the second side of the same coin. Uh, for what it's worth, it does so badly that this is kind of a forerunner to Neil and Geffen. It performs so badly that Chrysalis dumps him.
Yeah.
Dumps Richard and Linda from the label.
Yeah, I
So
know. Hey, for those who don't know, Chrysalis Records For those of you, and most of you may not know, it was the home of Jethro Tull and Blondie. This album, yes, like you said, Chris, it got lukewarm reviews when it came out. Didn't sell at all, and to this day, it isn't considered a Thompson classic. However, I am here to go beyond critical revisionism. Not only is it, in my opinion, the single most underrated album in Richard Thompson's catalog, solo or with Linda, it's one of his very best, easily in my top 10 RT albums. It's also easily the most musically eclectic of the six Richard and Linda albums,
Agreed.
containing, like you said, some of their most rocking, uplifting songs, some of their most beautiful ballads, and some of their most straight up catchiest songs, full of memorable pop hooks and melodies. This was surely done on purpose since, at this point in their careers, Richard and Linda wanted to sell records. Now, this isn't a bad thing. After all, the Velvet Underground went totally commercial with the album Loaded, and to this day, it stands as one of the greatest rock albums ever made. So anyway, back to the Thompsons. Spiritual songs were still present, but half of the songs on this album are quite secular, which probably, as you alluded to earlier, Chris, signaled a growing disillusionment with that hippie Sufi commune lifestyle they were living at the time. Like Richard himself has been rather elusive about this period, but Linda throughout the years has been very outspoken about how unhappy she was with the Sufi commune at this time.
Yeah, I mean, well, Richard even says it in the book that their
Yeah.
involvement in during those years is what ruined their marriage.
Yeah, totally. But yet, back to the music. Like you said, the album blasts off of the gate with a side rarely heard by them, and that is Angry Richard and Angry Linda. Civilization may not be a punk rock song, but the attitude of the lyrics and the energy of the folk rock on steroids performance belie the very likelihood that the Thompsons were certainly not keeping their heads in the ground throughout the 1970s. Yeah, the lyrics are a little heavy-handed in their sarcasm, but see, to me, that kind of spite is needed when you're writing a song about the complacency and shallowness of society. And coming from a writer known for utilizing restraint and detachment, that kind of forwardness is actually shocking and in a good way, and it's refreshing. Richard had always, in interviews up to this point, expressed a love for Louisiana Cajun music, and he
Yes.
he finally scratches that itch with Saturday Rolling Around, and unabashed joy of a folk jig, something the
Yeah.
Thompson duo were not necessarily known for.
Very, 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 very Zydeco.
Yeah, really much so. Um, Nothing prepares the listener, however, for, as you mentioned, Chris, the majestic "You Are Going to Need Somebody." The song needs to be spoken about again. It's one of those songs that roars out of the speakers and makes you think Allah may have actually been in the room when Richard wrote it.
Yeah.
Um, I,
Seriously. Yeah.
I already posted on our Facebook page, Curmudgeonly page, our homepage, a live performance of this song from 1980. The studio version is 3 minutes and 46 seconds of the most perfectly constructed, perfectly chorded, perfectly worded, perfectly sung pieces of music that cannot be called anything but pop folk.
Yep.
It's the kind of song that makes you wonder why more people haven't covered it and made it a standard.
Oh yeah. I
Um,
mean, just that chorus, just that chorus
yeah,
hook.
sure,
The refrain.
yeah,
The double refrain. I mean, it's
yeah,
just awesome.
yeah. I mean, yes, it is a spiritual song, but it works just as well as a plea to find a loved one or a romantic partner in your life
Yeah.
before it's too late and you grow old and shriveled. And that's how I interpreted it when I first heard it.
Hmm.
One of the beautiful things about Sunny Vista is that things don't stay dark for long.
Right.
Enter Justice in the Streets,
Oh
where
yeah.
Richard and Linda turn up the funk even more so than they did on First Light, to another gear, surpassing Lila from the previous album. Now, who cares if the chorus is basically the Thompsons chanting Allah over and over again? implying that, of course, the only salvation for humanity and the only way to destroy social inequality is for everyone to come together and give themselves to the grace of the Almighty. Who gives a fuck? When it's this funky, when it's this danceable, and when it's this rocking, Richard and Linda may as well be chanting Cheetos for all I care. You know, whereas the Thompsons perfected the art of sad songs as a balm to soothe depression, like I said earlier. They legitimately go for uplifting on this record. It's a very uplifting record, and it works stupendously. It's the kind of album that makes one think there's little Richard and Linda could do wrong, and almost no genre or subgenre that they could take from and make it their own, except for maybe hip hop.
Yeah, yeah,
um,
yeah. That would be interesting.
yeah, but in any case, if Sunny Vista is there, Velvet Underground's loaded, intentionally commercial, but and brimming with astounding songs and stagecraft, yet mind-bogglingly unsuccessfully commercial, then their next and final album together would be their Dylan's Blood on the Tracks. Take it, Chris.
Yeah, and in some ways, yes. We're going to talk about Shoot Out the Lights, which again might be the other record that y'all have at least heard of, because Shoot Out the Lights has made appearances on best of lists. Not quite as high as it used to. I saw I think it was Rolling Stone at the top 50 at some point
Yeah.
in the 90s. And it is a wonderful album. So let's set this one up. So again, like I said, so they do these two records, these No Man's Land records together. And now they don't have a label, and so now they're going to try to. They're swinging for the fences, but they're getting back to more. I think Richard is finding his voice again, and of course, part of that voice involves the strain in his marriage to Linda. Like we said, I mean, a lot of it has to do with them, the tension, and them growing apart as people as part of that experience when they come out the other side. And so this starts about a year after Sunny Vista, about 1980. They're going to work. What was his name? McGarity.
Jerry Rafferty. For those of you who don't know the name, Jerry Rafferty was in the 1970s, in the early to mid 70s, in the band Steelers Wheel, most known for their big hit single, their only hit,
Stuck
"Stuck
in
in
the
the
middle.
Middle with You,"
Yeah.
made famous also in the movie Reservoir Dogs. "Stuck in the middle with you," that one.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, I got you. So they're going to work. So they're going to work with him, and so they did all this. But he has now, Rafferty. He has now fallen into serious alcoholism that
Yeah.
is really putting a stain on the proceedings, and I guess it was a real mess. And they have these tapes that Thompson does not like and does not re- have any fond memories to take away from the sessions, so that gets shelved. About a year later, Joe Boyd, who was Fairport Convention's manager slash A&R guy, comes back along and says, "Hey, we need to get you back out there, and why don't you go use my studio on the cheap?" And so they already have these songs in the can, plus a couple of new ones. They go in there and they cut this record in about 4 days or something, and it becomes Shoot Out the Lights. The funny part is that when they're doing it, they're still together, but maybe at the beginning of the end. By 82, they're at the end.
Yeah.
And so it becomes an unintentional divorce record, but
Yeah.
one of the best ever made. And so it kind of works out that way. And so uh, what you'll notice about it is it's definitely a construct of the very early 80s. When you first hear it,
Sure.
when I first heard it 20 something years ago, I was like, what is this, Clapton? Because,
Yeah.
you go from hearing, I want to see the bright lights tonight, which is, a very sort of 70s folky, uh, of that era, that London era between like the late 60s and the mid 70s is very much of
Right.
that aesthetic. And then you listen to this and it's like, what the fuck is this, Clapton again?
Yeah.
And so that's the striking thing, but it's also striking is this is where Richard finally finds his voice and his confidence as a guitar hero and as a guitar god. He has been subtle for the most part, and sort of subtle and artistic, and in service of the songs up until this point. But and he still is. But here he's got magic fingers, and he's his playing is at its most emotional, at its most searing and aggressive, and just all of the varying styles that defined him as a guitar player, whether it's country music, whether it's blues, whether it's straight folk, any the Middle Eastern stuff, even surf rock in some respects. A lot of it comes into this record, and it's got some of the most beautiful songs I think ever recorded
Right.
on it. And you'll talk about in a minute. The highlight on it is "Walking on a Wire," which again is about a dissolving relationship, but features just this incredible melody,
Yeah.
and it's the kind of thing that you can't. There's certain songs in rock and roll and popular music that you cannot fully appreciate until you sing along.
Yeah.
You take on the role of the singer and sing along, and you realize just how powerful that song is emotionally, and about the dissolution of it. It's extraordinary, and 8 songs. Each song is incredible, and Richard is just on. I mean, that's him at his most confident, and not his angriest. That's his most confident record. That
Yeah.
he knows he's found his voice again, and he's living in the modern world. This is not anywhere close. This is not steeped in Sufism anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's back living in the real world, but with an assurance that you just didn't get until now, and you got it. And I think that's one of the Thompson becomes a legitimate hero, guitar hero on this record, and I think that's why it's so revered.
Yeah. Shoot Out the Lights, 1982. All right. The breakup album, the big breakup album, is something of a tradition in popular music. From Frank Sinatra's 1955 album In the Wee Small Hours, all the way to Billie Eilish's Happier Than Ever from last year.
Yep.
Artists in every genre have engaged in this tradition. Why? Well, more often than not, and for some reason only known to the cosmos, the breakup album usually ends up being some of the artist's best work. Bob Dylan's Blood on the Tracks is arguably his greatest record. Beck's Sea Change is one of his career defining albums. Lucinda Williams' album West is one of her masterpieces.
Uh,
Marvin Gaye. Yeah, what do you think?
oh, I'm saying Achtung Baby, which is partially more than half about Edge's divorce.
Oh yeah, it's true. Forgot about that's a good one. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's a good one. Marvin Gaye's "Here, My Dear" is
Oh,
both
great album.
one of the most audacious and brilliant albums of his repertoire, and both Joni Mitchell's "Blue" and Fleetwood Mac's "Rumors" were in the top 10 in Rolling Stone's recent list of the 500 greatest albums of all time. Now, Shoot Out the Lights, the final album in Richard and Linda's impeccable run of brilliant folk rock albums, undoubtedly belongs on any sensible person's list of 10 greatest breakup albums ever made. And if it isn't, that person needs to reevaluate their taste in music. Now, as you alluded to, Chris, needless to say, by the time of the writing and recording of the album, which spanned the period of 1980 and 1981, Richard Thompson really didn't give a shit anymore about writing songs to Allah. you know,
Yeah.
The album has several lyrical themes: betrayal, separation, loss. But the tone and the feeling of the record is pretty consistent throughout. And to me, it's always been a sense of desperation.
Yeah.
You can hear desperation in that rockabilly gallop of the opening track, Don't Renege on Our Love. You can hear desperation on the aching, mournful Walking on a Wire, which you just talked about. Quite possibly the greatest ballad the Thompsons ever produced, and that's saying something. You can hear desperation, lyrically at least,
Just
in
the
the
motion. Yeah.
the one before that, the
Oh.
angular, that new wave-ish sound of Man in Need,
Oh
which
yeah.
which sounds quite a bit oddly like early Talking Heads.
Yeah,
You
no, it does. Yeah, like you said, it's new wavy, and it's interesting because, like you said, there's a desperation, but it's the opposite case desperation. It's almost kind of like, I really wish I was still here with you, Linda, but I'm not. So now I'm a man in need for
yeah.
another woman. Yeah,
Yeah, totally. And you can also hear the desperation in the anguished bluesy title track where Richard unleashes one of his most epic, scorching guitar solos ever. Which leads to the question, what exactly is this desperation about? I mean, even though my marriage is not on the rocks, and Richard and Linda's clearly was during this time, I am married nevertheless, so I can ascertain that it's a desperation for understanding, for empathy, and for not being hurt anymore.
yeah,
And hey, people just grow apart sometimes, and some marriages aren't meant to last. I will let Richard explain this himself in a quote from his memoir, B Swing, which you've quoted from a few times already, Chris. Here's the quote. It, meaning the shoot out the lights period, was also the end of our marriage after 10 years. Our time with the Sufi community had put a tremendous strain on our relationship, and we barely survived that. We emerged as substantially different people, and I'm guilty of falling out of love with Linda and wanting to end it. That was a tough time for everyone, especially our children, and the wounds are still healing.
yeah.
But
No,
hey,
hmm
let's end this on a good note, shall we?
yeah,
Shoot Out the Lights was a critically adored sensation of a record upon release, finishing number 2 in the Village Voice's Paz and Jot poll of 1982
hmm
and in the top 10 of several other music publications. Its status has endured throughout the years. In a 1989 issue, I think you alluded to this, Chris. Rolling Stone placed it at number 9 in their list of 100 greatest albums of the 1980s. And in 2012, it came in at number 332 on its list of the 500 greatest albums of all time. Inexplicably and unfucking fathomably, it was left off entirely in Rolling Stone's 2020 list of the 500 greatest albums ever, proving once again that the younger generation of music critics have the most appalling taste in music since the pre-rock and roll era.
yeah. Pretty
More,
much. Yeah,
more importantly, though, Shoot Out the Lights kickstarted and re-energized Richard Thompson's solo career. He got a lot of airplay on college radio. He became an in-demand touring performer, and the last 40 years has only seen his stature and legend grow, at least among hardcore music geeks and music critics like us.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and it's interesting because according to the book, he lives in New Jersey, of
Yeah,
all places. But yeah, he's lived his life on the road, and he's continued to pump out some really strong music. We'll keep it short. Folks, check out his 1991 record, Rumor and Sigh,
great
which is
album.
wonderful. His 1999 record, Mock Tutor,
Mm-hmm.
which has some incredible stuff on it as well. He also composed the amazing and beautiful score to the documentary Grizzly Man, which is
Yes.
one of the most fascinating films, documentaries you will ever see. Uh, and he also had a tour. I believe he's done it a couple of times, called 1,000 Years of Music. If you go on YouTube, there's a, at least one recording of a full set. It's literally, like it says, it's 1,000 years of music with him interpreting stuff from, like, the fucking Nomad era,
Yeah.
and, like, back in Magna Carta. He's got it covered. Um, yeah, it's pretty fascinating. So he's done that. Also worth noting that Linda Thompson has kept going as a solo artist, and she's released some really great records. She had one in the early aughts, which I thought was fantastic, and so she's managed to keep herself out there and to keep going and relevant. And then also, their son Teddy is something of a prodigy himself. Very good singer, very good guitarist. He's done albums with Linda, He's closer with Linda than Richard. And so, they've done records together, and they, just as solid on the 2-part harmony. And so ultimately, if we have to wrap this up, Arturo, what would you say is succinctly the legacy of Richard and Linda Thompson?
All the people they've influenced and all the people who have covered them. Most of you may not know who Richard and Linda Thompson are, but you definitely know all the people who have professed love for their music, have professed being influenced by them, and have covered their songs. Now, I'm going to wrap this all with a nice ribbon and bow. I've already mentioned artists who have been undoubtedly influenced and or inspired by the duo, such as REM. By the way, guitarist Peter Buck has probably set a record with how many times he's name-checked Richard Thompson in interviews.
Also, didn't REM cover The Wall of Death?
Oh, yeah, I'm getting there.
Okay.
I mentioned Wilco. I mentioned Bonnie Prince Billy. I mentioned Lucinda Williams. I mentioned Laura Marling. I will also add to that list, if I may be so boldly opinionated,
Okay.
the Decemberists.
Yes.
Bright Eyes.
Yes.
Beck.
Yes.
Sunvolt, whose leader, Jay Farrar, was in the band Uncle Tupelo with Wilco's Jeff Tweedy. Elvis Costello, a longtime and outspoken admirer of Richard Thompson. And David Byrne, Talking Heads frontman, also a vocal RT fan. There have been not one, but 2 Richard Thompson covers albums, both of which came out in 1994. Artists / bands of renown that have covered Thompson songs with and without Linda are REM, the punk band X, Bonnie Raitt, like you mentioned, Chris, Bob Mould, singer-guitarist from Husker Du, Evan Dando of the Lemonheads, Los Lobos, Dinosaur Jr., Graham Parker, David Byrne, and Victoria Williams.
Yep.
Not enough? Not enough, huh? Here are some other big names who have graced Richard Thompson by covering his songs. The Neville Brothers, Bonnie Raitt, Emmylou Harris, Dave Gilmour, for those who don't know, the guitarist from Pink Floyd, and Alison Krauss. Now, Richard Thompson himself has many albums in his discography, but with Linda, he made only 6, and they are the foundation of his legacy. Folks, listeners, you owe it to yourselves, if you call yourselves music fans, to seek these albums out and listen to them, hopefully in their entirety and in chronological order. That collection of 6 albums is one of the most beautiful, enduring, and endlessly rewarding bodies of work in rock history. Period. So, everybody, welcome to the final segment of our show. And this is, of course, The Vault, where we get old albums from the past and talk about them and recommend them and say why we love them. Of course, this episode is about Richard and Linda Thompson, most known for their wonderful records of the 1970s. So Chris and I, we chose some early 1970s rock and roll. Some of it gnarly, some of it soulful, some of it glammy. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I would say that that's a pretty good description. This runs the gamut from A to about Z Z Z Z Z. These 2 artists, they're actually not as divergent as you would think.
Yeah. No, not at all. Let's start with mine. My vault pick is an admittedly very obscure psychedelic progressive rock band from Sweden called Trad Gras och Stenar. Now let me spell it out. TRAD, GRAS space OCH, and then Stenar, STENAR. From the Swedish, it translates into trees, grass, and stones. Now, I'm mentioning both psychedelic and progressive rock because their self-titled debut came out in 1970, right around the time that psychedelia turned into prog rock. The bands whose names are usually bandied about in this discussion are bands such as Pink Floyd, King Crimson, Yes, and so on. But not on the Curmudgeon Rock Report.
No.
On this podcast, we pride ourselves on being educational and talking about obscure bands, artists that you, our listeners, have never heard of and possibly will never hear of anywhere else. Therefore, Trad Gras och Stenar it is.
Yeah.
Okay. So, like I said, trees, grass, and stones is what their name means.
I'm sorry. I should have thought about that. But okay. Where's the Indians on the album covers?
Yeah, I know, right? If that sounds very hippy dippy-ish, it's because that's the kind of band these guys were. They formed in the summer of 1967, of course, as Parsons Sound. And although they never released an official album, they did do home recordings and demos between 67 and 68 that were released over 30 years later. These recordings find a band very fond of droning sounds, tape loops, and augmenting traditional guitar, bass, drums, rock instrumentation with cellos, violins, flutes, and saxophones. Wonderful. In 68, they changed their name to International Harvester and actually got to release an album titled Sov Gott Rosmarie, Sleep Tight Rosemary, which was an interesting merger of traditional Swedish folk music, lots of flutes, a cappella chanting, odd to non-Scandinavian ears percussion, and Velvet Underground inspired experimental rock. They shortened their name to just Harvester in 1969 and released the album Hemat, which was, no joke, recorded entirely in a small cafe owned by the Youth League of the Swedish Communist Party.
Nice.
Why, of course, what lyrically and thematically tied this early incarnation of the band together was what they saw as the gentrification and industrialization of Sweden, resulting in the erosion of traditional Swedish culture enforced upon them by the Western powers that be, i.e., the US and the rest of Europe. I guess nobody told these guys that the Soviet Union was just as preoccupied with industrialization and factorization, but hey, what the hell?
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, in the middle of the decade, they saw many houses destroyed and replaced by buildings and skyscrapers, and rural areas being converted to suburbs, full of concrete and glass. Understandably, this all planted the seeds of the lyrical agenda of International Harvester slash Harvester, and this strong environmentalist and naturalist streak would soon develop without the politics to inform Trad Gras och Stenar. Yes, there was another name change, but this time there was also a paring down of the lineup. Guitarist Bo Anders Persson, bassist Torbjorn Abeli, and drummer Thomas Mera Gartz kept only one of the classical string instrumentalists, cellist Arnie Eriksson, and converted him to guitar. They would go on to embrace a much more guitar-driven, heavier rock sound that was influenced by Jimi Hendrix and Cream. Their music would grow to demonstrate all the hallmarks of progressive rock: changing keys, tricky time signatures, unconventional chord progressions, unexpected tempo changes, etc., without sounding anything like their British contemporaries, most likely owing to the fact that they never really abandoned the traditional Swedish folk music that served as the bedrock for this new sound. So, what did this new sound actually sound like? Well, it starts off with an 8-minute version of Bob Dylan's All Along the Watchtower that comes off like a proto-metal procession march with a molten lava guitar solo searing through the whole track. Up next is another cover, the Rolling Stones' Satisfaction, that starts off faithfully enough to the original, but over the course of 11 minutes, it just kind of unfolds upwards into the cosmos with interweaving, bubbly, almost Jerry Garcia-like guitar solos and notes and maniacal drumming. Only the bass line gives the listener any idea that this is still Satisfaction. Other standout tracks, Sanningens Silverflod, translating into the Silver River of Truth, which maintains a walloping rhythm similar to the previous song, but rides a beautifully delicate melodic slide guitar throughout. You have a Tegenborgsvalsen, the Tegenborg Waltz, which takes an otherwise pretty waltz time classical tune and gives it a hammering sludge metal treatment a la Black Sabbath.
Oh yeah.
And then you have Svarta Parla, the Black Pearl, which is this haunting, traditional sounding Scandinavian folk ballad that's as dark and menacingly mesmerizing as detuned guitars and creepy violins can be. Oddly enough, this was their last studio album. They would go on to record 3 more albums, but all of them would be recorded live in outdoor festival conditions throughout Sweden and Denmark. Keeping in line with their environmentalist beliefs, I read somewhere that the members of the band believed the best way to capture the sound of musical energy was within the context of humankind communing with nature, away from the synthetic and stifling environment of a recording studio.
Makes them sound like
Or,
wolves in the throne room, for Christ's sake.
or maybe they were just too cheap to pay for a studio. Who knows? I mean, in any case, after releasing, pretty much after releasing 4 albums that sold remarkably quite well. They sold quite well as far as indie labels go in Scandinavia and in other parts of Europe. They
Yeah.
broke up in 1973. The core 3 members, guitarist Person, bassist Abeli, and drummer Gartz, reunited in 2004 and toured the US through 2005. Unfortunately, the members of the rhythm section, the latter 2, they died in 2010 and 2012, respectively, putting an end to the original lineup. Nevertheless, if you listeners out there like me have an unending thirst for freaky deaky early 1970s heavy rock that mashes up dark spectral Scandinavian folk with metal, psychedelia, and prog rock, look no further than Trad Gras och Stenar.
Yeah, I am so glad that you turned me on to this band, Arturo, because they're really good. I mean, you want to talk? I mean, the best kind of quote unquote stoner rock or stoner metal
Yeah.
is the stuff that's really tense, and it's like soulful industrial. It's
Yeah.
tense as hell. It's got this kind of slow creeping rockiness to it. I gotta say, this has become one of my. I like this cover of All Along the Watchtower uh, better than even well, obviously besides Hendrix's.
Yeah.
Well, you've got the Hendrix version and in the original version, but this is right there. I mean this is just awesome. And then, like you said, Satisfaction. Oh, those crazy Scandinavians. It's awesome, and it's tense, and it's just gnarly. Like you said, what's the Swedish word for gnarly? Yeah, maybe that's what they should have named the band instead. Trees, grass, and stones. Like I said, like we covered Wolves in the Throne Room about
Yeah.
2 months ago now or whatever.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's the same kind of stuff. Oh, we're singing to the trees. No, you're not. You're stoned off your ass. So, yeah, but anyway, but no, God bless them. I love this. I like this band, and so folks, go find it. They're on. This album is on Spotify, and they're all over YouTube. Bands like this, YouTube's the greatest thing to ever happen to quote unquote lost rock and roll, because
Yeah.
any kind of lost rock and roll, somebody out there has put it up on YouTube.
For sure.
It's even more reliable than Spotify. On that note, we switch from those crazy industrial metal or industrial kind of sludgy rock of the early 70s to somebody you probably have actually heard of but don't know much about, and that's Todd Rundgren. Todd Rundgren, once upon a time, was a star of 70s rock and one of the foremost uh, engineering and sort of sound experimental geniuses that there was. And so I'm covering his album from 1972, Something Anything. And so let's talk about this for a little bit. Where to start with Todd Rundgren? How about a quick run through of his resume? Philly kid comes of age as the Beatles and the Stones are hitting America. Moves to LA, finds modest success with a fuzzed out 4-piece garage rock band called Nas or Naz.
Yeah, I think it was the Naz. The Naz.
The Naz, Nazz, not the rapper, Naz. Okay. Now, he's such an admirer and adherent of Laura Nyro, which is obvious when you listen to his best stuff.
Nero, by the way. It's
Nero, not Nyro. Nero. Okay.
Yeah.
Never heard it pronounced. He secures a meeting with her, and he actually got an offer from her to lead her band or be her lead producer. But out of loyalty to Nas, he turns this down, and then within a year gets his ass fired from Nas. And so now he's no longer there. So he moves back east, and he becomes the inaugural studio wizard of Bearsville Studios up there in Woodstock. And he engineers, at their request, the band's album Stage Fright. And so he begins to get this profile as an ace guy in the studio, as an engineer and a producer. From there, he is able to secure a deal, and he's now going to put out his own stuff. At first, he uses the moniker Runt, and he releases 2 albums under the name Runt. Gets him enough cachet to where he now is going to record an actual solo record, which is this one we'll talk about in a few minutes, Something Anything. So he does that, becomes a legitimate pop star with a couple of hits and a huge profile. And he promptly gets bored with that, of being an ultra competent wonderkind, and he takes a shitload of acid and he cranks out a marvelously strange record called A Wizard, a True Star. You ever heard it, Arturo?
Yeah, that came after Something Anything, right?
Yeah, it was right after it. And so this is kind of like the equivalent of Neil doing Harvest and then following Time Fades Away. This is even worse. So this is like tearing it all down. So now he swerves his way from here. He ends up becoming a superstar producer. He produces "We're an American Band" by Grand Funk Railroad. He produces the New York Dolls, first record and subsequent releases by them. And most famously, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your perspective, he produces Meatloaf's Bad Outta Hell.
Oh, boy.
Yep. And he redeems himself. He also produced XTC's Skylarking, which is a great record from 1986. So he does that. And then from the 80s onward, he becomes a true multimedia renaissance man, early innovator of computer graphics and interactive music software. He also continued to release albums as certain music and styles tickled his fancy. The most fun of these, and I encourage everyone to find this, is the 2011 record Todd Rundgren's Johnson, which is a 12-song tribute to Hey Hey Now bluesman Robert Johnson. And so this is Todd Rundgren in Todd Rundgren style, playing covers of Robert Johnson blues songs, which is not a surprise because he actually got his start in blues band covers, bar band blues covers. And so now, look, as time has gone on and Rundgren has become content to pursue his passions and has eschewed anything resembling a limelight, his influence and visibility has perhaps waned.
It has.
It shouldn't, because and the most shining testament to this is Something Anything, which is an epic and at times epically strange double album. I love it, have for years. Back in 1989, Axl Rose told Rolling Stone in a long-form interview feature that the album was his current favorite, while also mentioning that his 2 lifelong go-tos were Nevermind the Bollocks and Queen 2. Right on there, Bill Bailey, for sure. So what is it that excited Axl and scores of other musicians for 2 decades plus? Arguably, this album is 4 EPs in one. And I suspect it was willfully designed that way. Because, think about it. It's 25 songs in 90 minutes. It begins with a wonderfully romantic male impression of Carole King on I Saw the Light.
Yep.
And it ends with a body cranked out bar blues workout called Slut. I don't think the album was made with cohesion in mind. And so it's really better to look at it as 4 parts, which actually Rundgren, I think, wants us to because he named each side of this 4-sided double LP. Part 1 is a bouquet of ear-catching melodies, which is a perfect name for it because that's what it is. Part 2 is called the cerebral side, where more of that Laura Nero influence starts to come out. Part 3 is called The Kids Get Heavy, which contains one of his most revered songs, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then part 4 is called Baby Needs a New Pair of Snakeskin Boots, a pop operetta. And so he kind of willfully breaks these down. So he recorded the majority of the album in Los Angeles. He played all of the instruments himself, at least for the stuff out there. He was able to parlay the little bit of success he had and a growing reputation for his studio genius, and that afforded him the freedom to do this. And so, he would spend his days in the studio, and he was such an obsessive that he actually had an 8-track installed in his living room at his apartment. And so he's working all the time. Process definitely fueled by both weed and speed, specifically Ritalin. And something, Rundgren has done interviews where he said, "Yeah, I was cranking out songs in 20 minutes, man." Yeah, I bet you were, because, yeah. I mean, he said weed and speed will do that to you. So then, he's got all this material that he's recorded, and an earthquake hits LA in early 72. And understandably, wait for it, shook up Rundgren, returns to New York. He's got enough material that he's got the potential to bump things up to a double album, which he did. And he held a couple of live in the studio recording sessions in both New York at the recording plant and up there in Woodstock at Bearsville. And it produced some of the goofiest but also prettiest stuff on the record. And those New York sessions are what make up that Baby Needs a New Pair of Snakeskin Boots side, part 4. So the album spawned a couple of hits, and both of which are long-standing classic rock radio staples. The aforementioned I Saw the Light and Hello, It's Me. Each song is marvelous, particularly Hello, It's Me, which began life on Naz's self-titled 1968 debut. Back then, it played like a close cousin of those beautiful but oddly spooky ballads from post-Brian Wilson meltdown-era Beach Boys records. It'll especially make huge fans of the Beach Boys record Friends smile, what with the congas and the chimes and the pained post-adolescent vocals and harmonies. But here on Something Anything, Hello, It's Me takes on the form of a maturely rendered blue-eyed soul song, complete with a horn section and organ licks, which does the magic trick of converting a lyric of relational, maybe sexual longing from something sort of creepy into something actually, at least on the surface, sweet and charming. As you can imagine, a masterfully made 90-minute record such as this one has many other highlights. For me, here are some of the other standouts. There is the seminal power pop anthem, Couldn't I Just Tell You? If you haven't heard it, yes, you have. That's how influential it is. Tight, soaring, gorgeous, perfect for a sunny beach day with your bros and your best girl. You can just hear Cheap Trick, Weezer, Fountains of Wayne, and countless other power pop bands being born in the song's wake. There's the song Wolfman Jack, which is a wonderfully reverent tribute to the Motown sound. Think of Smokey Robinson at his rockingest, while backed by the Supremes, harmonizing at their highest, funkiest point. And then there's really the entirety of side 4, which is that's a 7-song stretch. Basically, Arturo and I come from basically the first CD era. And so we were the first generation that was taught not to think of things in terms of sides, which is too bad, because back in the vinyl days, that actually was a thing and it mattered. And so side 4 is this wonder. It's a strange but really unified side. And so what you get, it starts with a lo-fi overture medley of the old tune "Money." That's what I want. Mixed in with a silly and perhaps improvised jam called "Messin' with the Kid." That is followed by a sweet soul ballad called "Dust in the Wind." No, not that dust in the wind. Thank goodness. That is followed by "Piss Aaron," which is a country-inflected mid-tempo ditty that features longtime Neil Young sideman Ben Keith on pedal steel. Then you get a "Hello, It's Me," which it's pretty obvious, by the way, that these are all like one takes or live takes because there's a lot of like silly banter going
Oh,
on
totally.
before they go into that. And "Hello, It's Me" gets some of that too. Then the next song, which has the funniest song title on the record, "Some Folks Is Even Whiter Than Me," but it actually is a pretty sophisticated soul. Like, I guess it's got a slinky sax and percussion driven groove that's way more sophisticated than the title would suggest. Here, I think you could arguably say that Rundgren out Steely Dan, and he could do that when
Yeah.
he wanted to. Actually, he could probably do anything he wanted to at any time. He was that talented. That's followed up by "You Left Me Sore," which is a tenderly rendered breakup lament. And then that album closer I talked about earlier, "Slut," which features this funnier than it has a right to be lyric. "She's got saggy thighs and baggy eyes, but she loves me in a way that I can still recognize." Oh, that's just lovely. So ultimately, Todd Rundgren could have ridden the perfect pop and obvious musical gifts to the top of the pop superstar mountain in the 1970s if he had wanted to, but he didn't want to. So while we got a lot of innovative stuff, and okay, we also got Bad Out of Hell in the years that followed, we never got another Something Anything. That's okay, though. The album stands as perhaps the most underrated double album in all of rock. It's absolutely magnificent.
Yeah, it's definitely his best album, and here's the reason why. I'm going to praise him here, and then I'm going to criticize him as well. Throughout the years, if you follow Todd Rundgren's discography, especially throughout the '70s, by the '80s he was terrible. But
Well,
like,
you know what? Come on, bang on the drum all day. Come on.
Yeah, that is catchy. But anyway, like his discography, there are many sides to Todd Rundgren. You have the perfect pop songsmith Todd Rundgren. You have the brill building, Tin Pan Alley, Laura Nero worshiping piano guy Todd Rundgren. You have the heavy metal hard rock Todd Rundgren. You have the prog rock Todd Rundgren, which was in the band Utopia.
Yep.
And then you have the stupid, dopey schlock humor Todd Rundgren.
Yeah, he definitely wanted to be Frank Zappa when he grew up.
Right. And the thing about this album, Something Anything, it ties all of those aspects together, but underpins them with really, really good, tight songwriting.
Oh yeah.
Even the silly shit is well written and catchy and hooky and melodic. And that's what makes this album his best album. It takes every aspect of Rundgren and in a weird way kind of economizes it.
Yeah.
And ties it together and strapped down to the earth and is tied down with really good songcraft and songwriting. Now, here's the bad thing about Todd Rundgren. Whenever he goes off and ventures off into like all his other genres and subgenres and styles, he's never quite as good as when he's being pop Rundgren.
Right.
Pop Rundgren is the best Rundgren. And that's what you see in Something Anything more than anything else, more than on any other Rundgren album, is pop Rundgren. Rundgren's at his best when he was being pop. I think Utopia is a piece of crap. That band sucked. That's a shitty. That's like one of the like one of the worst prog rock bands ever. I'm not a fan of stupid schlock jock humor Rundgren, which has not aged well at all.
No, not at all.
By modern times, and I'm not a really big fan of that whole Tin Pan Alley, Laura Nero type stuff. It's not my kind of music.
No, that stuff is good. You know me. I'm definitely more of a Cole Porter guy than you are.
Yeah.
But so I don't mind that stuff.
Yeah, I'm not a Broadway musical dude. So anyway, but for me, the best Rundgren is the pop Rundgren. That's why this album is at the is his best.
he was so good at the pop stuff, and he just had, he had that craft, but he didn't want to be pegged as a male Carole King. And he, maybe he's one of these like perfectionist weirdo geniuses. Maybe he just didn't have the self-esteem. Ultimately, I mean, he thought that the pop Todd Rundgren was the lazy Todd Rundgren. No, just because you can crank one of these things out in 20 minutes doesn't make you lazy. It makes you brilliant.
Yeah.
But I think that was the thing. He got bored with that, or he said, you know what, this is beneath me, or something like that. And so he went off and did all that other. I like A Wizard of True Star, though. That's a nutty record. It's fun.
It is. It's not bad. It's not bad.
Yeah, but then also, again, I think in terms of innovation, I mean, the stuff he was doing in the 80s and 90s. What was the one thing he did where he released this? It's not really an album, but he released what amounted to like a disc. It was like a software program with like 110-second musical excerpts. And what it did is that there were many songs hidden within these 10-second things, but it allowed people to stitch them together. It was kind of like choose your own adventure of songwriting, song making. And so, and apparently, I guess you could find some brilliant little songs within all that. But he did it in 10-second excerpts like for a computer interface. And he also did like a lot of stuff like, colors, and he did a lot of innovative early video type stuff. I mean, a song of his is one of the earliest videos that MTV played. Was one of his. So in a lot of ways, again, so he's one of these, kind of just powerful geniuses, maybe disturbed and disturbing in some respects. And Liv Tyler's father. Also Steven Tyler. Well, it's Steven Tyler's seed, but Todd Rundgren helped raise the kid. So,
and she still ended up looking like Todd Rundgren. How was that possible?
Oh no, she started. Yeah, well, yeah, she looked like Todd Rundgren with Steven Tyler's lips. That's about the only thing she inherited from Steven Tyler. But anyway, yeah, like I said, Rundgren is one of those guys that he could have been. He had the charisma, he had all of that, he had the talent. If he had wanted to do the male Carole King thing, he would have been enormous, and he would have been a huge star. But he chose the lesser path. Now, again, he still ends up with some awesome stuff out of that. Say what you want about Bad Out of Hell. I've always been an admirer of Steinman more than a fan. But it is a hell of a production job. I'll give him that. So anyway, there's not too much to lament from Rundgren. He's lived a wonderfully strange, exotic, interesting American life. So more power to him. And in the meantime, go find something, anything, and make that your homework for the week. Besides Richard and Linda Thompson. And with that, we now leave the vault. And folks, it's been real. It's been interesting. Don't know if it's been real interesting, but thank you for hanging out with us. We should say that you could always hit us up at curmudgeonrock@gmail.com. We've talked about our curmudgeonly community on Facebook. We'll probably have several threads that come out of this. Stay tuned for more Richard Thompson stuff, and for more stuff that will reveal the majesty of our next subject, which Arturo is going to be the next in our series of In Defense Of episodes. Well, folks, before we depart, one thing to note. We mentioned how YouTube is the great preserver of lost music. This, unfortunately, includes the catalog of Richard Thompson. The albums Pour Down Like Silver, First Light, and Sunny Vista can be found there, but not on Spotify. So check out the special duo we've just introduced you to in those three instances on YouTube. We'll see everyone back here in 2 weeks.